This case study looks at a Year 5 project involving humanities, history. Although actually the original brief from the teacher identified geography and history as possibilities, maybe also science. Interestingly, in her description of the reason she wanted to bring the subject to life in the classroom was that she says geography and history are areas of the curriculum that are very information dense. It makes teaching these a challenge and often creates motivation and engagement issues within students, especially as the topics are taught predominantly in the afternoon when perhaps the children are flagging. In a subsequent email from the teacher, she actually focused on ultimately her preference, which was history, and specifically the topic of Off With Her Head, a link in history about Anne Boleyn and her execution, and open to ideas about how that could happen and giving an indication of when it was going to happen in the curriculum. In other words, it was something she was scheduled to teach. This was not something that was going to be squeezed in addition to her programmed lessons. So in the Step 3 document, where we try to summarise an outline project plan to suggest how this might look, we summarise what's been said previously in those emails and in her brief. And then in describing what the students will actually do, what the project will actually look like in the classroom, we say that Off With Her Head, this topic, explores circumstances around the beheading of Anne Boleyn, including a mock-up of the preceding trial, which required children to apply their learning about historic events, timelines, and significant individuals, notably Henry VIII. So, using material gathered from a local firm of solicitors, children can consider and explain if the trial was fair. As well as enacting the trial, children could produce a display, perhaps including what they've learned about the way trials are now conducted. In other words, connecting the past, this historic topic, with the current work of the legal profession. And in the brief that we sent to it was a local firm, although they operate nationally, Knights PLC, and it was a company that had already signed up with their Primary Futures programme, who were actually part of the initiative in Derby. The brief says what's required. It repeats in summary form what's been put in those earlier briefs from the teacher and then an outline project plan, and it describes what we envisage happening. And what is it we're asking them to do? A solicitor from Knights will be invited to the mock trial and display, providing encouraging feedback and saying a bit about their career in the legal profession and day-to-day work. Subsequently, we got into conversation with one of the people at Knights PLC and explained a bit more about how this might work and how it might actually knit into their existing volunteering programme, where they permit staff to give 4 hours of their time to some sort of community activity. So we're saying this is going to work very well within that commitment by the organisation. It will not require more than 4 hours, and suggesting that there might be an opportunity to provide some information beforehand, perhaps even an informal video comment from the volunteer, and as well as coming in at the end of the programme to give feedback on the young people's work as this legal expert being brought into the situation. So we ended up meeting up with one of the volunteers, somebody who stepped forward, a senior associate at the legal firm, who was really keen to be involved, and prepared some PowerPoint slides to explain the challenge and what it was about and the relevance of Knights PLC, and also recorded informally on a mobile phone, and nothing more sophisticated than that, a couple of interviews with the legal expert, which were then incorporated into the slides. And so the slides, this is a selection of the slides, included this question: having set the scene and thought about Anne Boleyn's trial and what actually happened, what the historic accounts tell us, the questions posed to the children: would that trial be fair today? What would it be like? What would happen if it happened today? And who better to ask than a legal expert? So we introduced the organisation, said something in just 3 bullet points about them, so the youngsters understood the credibility of this organisation as an expert in legal affairs. Who better to ask? And we introduced them also to Andrew, the senior associate, who says, I'm going to help. I think I'd like to be involved in this. And so the first video that was shown was about him introducing himself, saying what his job was, how he chose that career. Interestingly, he'd started out having studied history at university and then latterly moved into the legal profession. And then he asked this question: what makes a fair trial? And the click here takes the children through in the classroom to a link showing the video where he explained. Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, I remember studying the Tudors both at school and later on in university, and I think the most important thing about the Tudors is that you have to remember that they lived at a time that was completely different to how we live now. Some of the things that we take for granted in terms of being free, having certain rights, just didn't exist back then. So what you have to always do is think about the Tudors in the time that they existed, rather than trying to compare it necessarily with today. But what you have to remember is the best thing about history is the fact that it informs where you are now. So everything that has gone before you, you can learn the lessons from, and you can bring that forward to today so that you don't make the same mistakes in many cases as people made down history. So the key things to think about when you think about whether Anne Boleyn's trial was fair: the first is, was she presumed to be innocent until proven guilty? The second is, did she have a public trial in front of an independent court? And the final thing is that you have to remember that in order for a person to be guilty, then there needs to be no reasonable doubt in the minds of those making the decision. So those are the three things that you need to look at in considering Anne Boleyn's trial, and whether or not it was fair by today's standards will be dependent on the answers to those questions.
So after the children had heard from Andrew, both introducing himself, talking about his career, talking about his job, and then giving some tips about what makes a fair trial, they were presented with this sort of summary, asking, when you consider the matter, did it show these principles of innocent until proven guilty, public trial and independent courts, and being found guilty beyond reasonable doubt? Very importantly, he says his final parting shot is to say, I look forward to hearing your thoughts. So the children knew that Andrew was going to be coming into the classroom, not at the start, but at the end of the project. And that is exactly what happened. He came in, he listened to the children speak in class, he got involved in a discussion with the children, facilitated by the teacher. Here you can see arrangements being made for that to be set up, organised in a way that fitted in with the teaching programme, the scheme of work. And the feedback from Andrew after that was that he enjoyed himself. So, volunteering in a school can look like a whole variety of things. Sometimes it is a great experience, sometimes it's not. And in this case, he said, I enjoyed myself. I'd be happy to help out again in the future. And I guess ultimately that's the outcome we want, is not just somebody saying, I've done my bit, but I wouldn't do that again because it took so much of my time, or it required loads of preparation, or I felt like a fish out of water, stood at the front of a classroom being a surrogate teacher. He clearly wasn't. The whole process was facilitated by the teacher, incorporated within a scheme of work, and he was simply having to be himself, an expert in legal matters, not trying to take on the role of a teacher at any point. And the teacher was happy as well, happy that the thing was organised. Great for the children to gain some insight into his job and get feedback on their work. So seeing both the benefit of getting a glimpse of where they could be in the future, what does a job in the legal profession looks like, but getting feedback also about their work, which was about history. So let's hear from the children. How did they feel about it?
We've had Andrew here, and it's really made me consider being a lawyer when I get older.
Well, what is Andrew? Who is Andrew?
Andrew is the lawyer that came into our classroom.
Okay, and how has he helped you think about becoming a lawyer?
Because he's mentioned that you have to be really talkative and you have to prove your points in arguments, and I'm really good at that.
Okay, brilliant. What was he helping you with? Because he was It was a history lesson, wasn't it?
So we were learning about Tudors, and we're writing a persuasive letter of we're the defence, and the other class were the prosecutors, and we had to explain Anne Boleyn should have been free and not bad.
Okay, but you were going to do that anyway, weren't you? So how does it help having Andrew come in?
Because he is a lawyer, a respectful, nice, caring lawyer. He came with his own time.
Yes.
His special own time when he could he would have sat down doing some work. But actually he came to visit us and tell us more about his job and his.
So what's
the
difference?
career.
What's the difference between a lawyer giving you some ideas about what you were learning in class about Anne Boleyn's trial, and a teacher doing the same? What's the difference?
Oh, it's because the teachers are not lawyers, so they haven't experienced how it feels
Okay.
like to be a lawyer. And
All right.
the lawyer has the job of the prosecutor or the defense.
Yeah, it's his job, isn't it, in this case? Yes. Did you get some feedback about your letter that you read out? No. Okay, did you read out your letter? Okay. So you read out your letter that you've written already, and Andrew gave you some feedback. What did he say about your letter?
He said that it's really good and it might change the judge's mind.
Well, how did you feel when a lawyer, an expert, said that your letter might be good enough to change the judge's mind?
I felt happy and really shocked because I didn't know how I came up with these ideas. It just popped up in my head.
So was it different getting that feedback from Andrew than if your teacher had said exactly the same?
Yes, because Andrew has a career of being a lawyer and he has more experience than a teacher.
Okay. Now you were telling Ashley at the end of the class when he'd left that he's changed the way you think about your future. What did you say?
He said that being a lawyer is fun and it's it makes you feel good because you help people.
Okay. Had you been thinking about being a lawyer beforehand?
No.
But you are now.
Yeah.
What did he say you need to do in order to become a lawyer?
You have to learn a lot and listen.
So how might that change the way you are in school? Not this school and your next school. How will it change things?
It will change things because you will get better grades. And if it comes to A levels and GCSEs,
Yeah.
you can get the high score and go to a really good university.
And he did tell you that he went to university, didn't he? Were you thinking of going to university? Had you thought about going to university before?
No.
But you're thinking about it now. Brilliant. What do you think you're doing when you leave school?
Don't know.
Have you any ideas about the future, what you might want to do in a job or? Okay. How does it help having someone like Andrew coming in and telling you about his work?
Because it gave me a bit more understanding about my English work. So I got to actually know what the side of a defender.